Now, I'm sure I'm not the only person to notice, but clearly Nikola Jokic and Luka Doncic were very good friends, and that was on display during All-Star Weekend, and that has led to these rumors of the possibility of down the road Luka and Jokic teaming up and playing together. And all these rumors don't just come from, oh, a couple of interactions at All-Star Weekend. These guys are friends. That makes total sense. But we absolutely have had friendships and bonds and relationships turn into super teams in the NBA, even ones that would be on the level of Jokic and Luka joining forces. The Heatles initially with LeBron, Wade, and Bosh, that team, the idea of that team was formed on Team USA when they were playing together internationally. They kind of started to build the idea of what eventually the Heat would look like. And it's not just LeBron either. Kyrie and KD have openly admitted that they discussed playing together and made it kind of a plan to play together and to join forces on the same team way before they actually signed with the Nets in 2019, even going back to some interactions again at All-Star Weekend, the same way it's happening with Luka and Jokic. And then, of course, infamously, players can just get recruited to teams as well, just like the way that Draymond recruited Kevin Durant to come to Golden State in the first place. But interestingly, as it relates to Luka and Jokic, this hasn't happened with international players yet, or at least players that didn't really play basketball in the States and maybe a little bit in high school, but not really, right? So we've got Giannis, Embiid, Luka, Jokic. Those four guys have all stayed put. They're all still with the team that drafted them. And so, generally speaking, there isn't a ton of speculation about them potentially joining forces. However, Luka's situation in Dallas is worth monitoring. Now, I'm not saying that he's going to leave. I'm not even saying that it's going to be him and Jokic, playing on the same team within a couple of seasons. But when you look at the situation in Dallas, it is at least worth keeping an eye on. And I can promise you that there are front offices around the league right now that are formulating a plan to potentially try and recruit Luka to their team, whether it be via a trade in a couple of years or when his contract is over in 4 or 5 seasons. And they're looking at the situation in Dallas and seeing how they could possibly exploit it. Now, to be clear, Dallas is good right now. They're going to be a conference finals contending team. The West is absolutely loaded, but as of the recording of this video, they've won 6 straight. They are a good team. They are not bad by any means. I don't think that they are a top tier contender, certainly, but they are going to be heard from in the postseason and are one good postseason run away from potentially making the conference final. So this isn't a situation where Luka's surrounded by a team that is so untalented that we should be concerned about him asking out this summer. However, from a roster construction standpoint, there is some interesting stuff to take a look at, because as of the trade deadline, the Mavs have gone way more all in than I think people realize. They don't have control over their 2024 first round pick or 2029 or 2030, which one, obviously they don't have the assets, but two, restricts their ability to trade other first round picks on into the future as well. And some of that stuff is connected to bringing in Daniel Gafford and PJ Washington at the trade deadline, in addition to bringing in Grant Williams via pick swap in the previous offseason. And on top of that, right now, already, before bringing back any players, before re-signing anybody, before signing players to new contracts, Dallas already has committed $171 million in player salary for next season. That includes, of course, the big contract that Luka is on, the big Kyrie contract, a handful of other guys as well. So before they even try and add anybody within the mid-level exception or anything like that, they're at $171 million. And that's a very, very important number, because we all know that these new rules are coming into play now in the NBA in terms of the second apron and some of the restrictions that apply to teams that reach that apron. And next year, the second apron is going to be about $190 million. So if Dallas brought in some minimum contract guys, a couple of guys in the draft and an MLE level player, they're going to be very, very close to a second apron team. And again, that is going to be more punishing for teams that want to spend more and more than it ever has been in the NBA before. And I'm not saying that this is a bad roster that Dallas has built. Clearly it's a good one, but it is definitely an expensive one. And having an expensive non-contending roster is a bigger issue now than it's ever been before in the history of the league. And then you add on top of that some of the uncertainty around Kyrie Irving, who is a free agent in the summer of 2026. He has a player option for that offseason. We never know what's going to happen with Kyrie from week to week, from offseason to offseason. We don't know what kind of player he's going to be in 2026, but that is important to keep an eye on, as the second best player on the team is not under contract for more than this season and one more. Now, as we reel all of this back into Luka, it's important to keep in mind and understand where Dallas is at in terms of their future assets with their draft picks, as well as their salary for next season, because even though they look good right now and the roster looks good, the West is absolutely loaded this year. I feel like we say that every year, and there's going to be a team that feels like they should be a second round or a conference finals level team that does not get out of the first round. It's going to happen to someone, and when that happens, and you're a team like Dallas that potentially feels a little bit concerned about Luka looking elsewhere, eventually down the road, one bad postseason run can definitely have a significant impact on that. Now, to give the team and the organization some credit, they have shown themselves to be a really, really good drafting team. Obviously, going back to bringing in Luka, but then even since then as well. And so, yes, it sucks they're not going to have the first round picks and some of the assets there, but assuming they keep some of those first that they still have, they should be able to draft pretty well, and they do have some good young talent on the roster as well. There's some unproven guys like Olivier Max Prosper, we're still trying to figure out what he's going to be, but Josh Green, Derek Lively, PJ Washington, Daniel Gafford, these are some young talent and some young talented players, I should say, that they're going to have an opportunity to grow, obviously, within this roster, but also could be potential assets down the road in a star trade. And so theoretically, right now, this offseason, if Dallas wanted to make a trade for a star, potentially, they could do, Josh Green, a couple of other these young guys I just mentioned, and a first round pick. That's kind of what they could offer right now. And that's always important to keep in mind when you're trying to keep a star like Luka around, is like, who else could they bring in? What's their ability to bring in another player? And certainly they have the capability of it, but in comparison to some of the other teams around the league, Dallas is kind of lower on the ladder in terms of their ability to bring in another star. Now, I say all of this to say that Dallas is in a very interesting situation in terms of their future, as well as the way that Luka sees the future going in Dallas. Presumably, all we know right now is that Luka likes being there. He's definitely got some say in the organization and some power within the organization. I think he is one of the primary reasons that Rick Carlisle is not the head coach in Dallas anymore. I think it's clear that he has some influence there, and I think that's a really good situation for any young player, any player as young as Luka, to be in, to feel like you have some of that control. And that's not going to be an easy thing for him to just give up and go team up with some of his buddies on another team. And again, our assumption right now and everything we know says that Luka is happy being in Dallas, and everything that we know about the roster right now, especially this season, as well as how good Luka has been in the past in the postseason, tells us that he should not be going anywhere. Dallas should be successful in the playoffs and everything should be fine. However, if you were to point out a player that a lot of teams around the league are going to be planning on and trying to come up with ways to pry them away from their current team, I think Luka is very, very high on that list. And anytime that happens, you're going to have a lot of rumors. You're going to have a lot of pressure, not only around the player, but around the postseason success of your individual team. We've seen this for a decade now. I think we saw it last year with Donovan Mitchell when Cleveland lost in the first round, and then all of a sudden there was some buzz this season about him possibly wanting to be elsewhere. Obviously, it's different because Luka's been there the entire time, but we saw this as well with Giannis, when I think he legitimately considered leaving before signing the extension, and then of course they go on to win the title in 2021. This happens all the time with young players that every other team in the league would like to have. And those rumors that we had at All-Star Weekend, just from a handful of interactions between him and Jokic, that's just kind of a taste of what things could be like for Luka's, next move here, depending on how this postseason and subsequent postseasons go for Dallas. And so before anybody gets mad at me and says that I'm saying Luka's going to leave, that's not what I'm saying. It's just these kinds of interactions, these kinds of rumors that we had at All-Star Weekend, those are only going to become increasingly more prevalent around Dallas and around Luka if they're unable to have a successful postseason this year or moving forward. And I'm sure plenty of other teams around the league are already keeping an eye on the possibility of what his next move might be.